They say the Bible is the ultimate truth. But what if I told you that some of its most famous prophecies were actually influenced by ancient myths? This is the story no one talks about. Mythology and the Bible, two worlds we often think are completely separate. One full of gods and legends, the other full of divine revelations. But what if these two worlds collided? What if ancient myths, like those of the Greeks, Egyptians, and Babylonians, actually shaped some of the Bible's most profound prophecies? Today, we will uncover some of the surprising ways mythology may have influenced biblical prophecies. Let's dive in. For centuries, scholars and believers have debated the origins of biblical prophecies. Were they purely divine messages, untouched by outside influence? Or did ancient cultures shape the way these prophecies were written and understood? Here's the thing. Many of the people who lived during the time the Bible was written were surrounded by mythological stories from other cultures. The big question is, how much of that cultural exchange influenced what we now consider sacred biblical text? 1. Mesopotamian myths and the Bible. Let's start with one of the earliest and most important ancient civilizations, Mesopotamia. The people who lived here told stories that, if you listen closely, sound a lot like certain biblical narratives. For example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known stories, features a great flood, much like Noah's. In the Gilgamesh story, a man named Utnapishtim builds a boat to survive the flood, and afterward, the gods make a covenant with him. Sound familiar? These similarities beg the question, did the flood story from Mesopotamian mythology directly influence the story of Noah's Ark? 2. The influence of Egyptian beliefs. Now let's shift to Egypt, the land of pharaohs and gods. The book of Exodus tells the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt and the infamous plagues that struck the land. Interestingly, many scholars believe that the plagues, such as the Nile turning to blood, the death of the firstborn, and the swarms of locusts, echo elements of Egyptian mythology. Ancient Egyptians believed that their gods controlled nature, and these same natural disasters were seen as signs of divine displeasure. Could the biblical plagues have directly responded to these Egyptian mythological beliefs, retelling the story in a way that positioned the God of Israel as the ultimate authority? 3. Babylonian prophecies and the Book of Daniel. Fast forward to the time of the Babylonian Empire, when the Jews were exiled from their homeland. This exile profoundly impacted Jewish thought and prophecy, especially the Book of Daniel. This book shows visions of beasts, mysterious statues, and end-time prophecies. Many of these images bear a striking resemblance to Babylonian myths. The Babylonians believed in cosmic battles between gods and monsters, images that appear in Daniel's visions. For example, Daniel's vision of the four beasts rising from the sea parallels the Babylonian myth of Tiamat, the chaotic sea dragon. Could it be that Daniel's prophecies were influenced by Babylonian myths? 4. Greek mythology and early Christian thought. Now, let's talk about the Greeks. By the time of Jesus, Greek culture had spread across the known world, influencing everything from politics to religion. Early Christian writings, particularly the New Testament, were not immune to this influence. Take the figure of Satan, for example. While the Old Testament presents Satan as more of a prosecutor figure, the New Testament portrays him as a full-blown antagonist. Some scholars suggest that Greek mythology influenced this shift, where gods and demigods often fought cosmic battles of good versus evil. The concept of a cosmic battle between good and evil may have been shaped by stories like those of Zeus fighting the Titans or Prometheus rebelling against the gods. 5. The role of prophets as intermediaries. Another point of connection between mythology and biblical prophecy is the role of the prophet. In many ancient cultures, including Greek and Roman traditions, there were seers who communicated with the gods and foretold the future. In the Bible, prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel played a similar role. But the idea of someone speaking directly for a god wasn't unique to Israel. Greek mythology, for example, had the Oracle of Delphi, a priestess who would deliver cryptic messages from the god Apollo. Could the biblical idea of a prophet have been influenced by these mythological seers? At the end, the key moment when these mythological influences become undeniable is how they've shaped our understanding of biblical prophecy today. The flood in Noah's story isn't just a tale of survival. It echoes older stories of divine judgment. The apocalyptic visions in Daniel aren't just predictions of the future. They mirror Babylonian and Greek myths of cosmic battles. And even the figure of Satan, as the embodiment of evil, carries with it the shadows of mythological villains from other cultures. This doesn't diminish the Bible's power or its messages. In fact, it makes them even more profound. It shows that biblical prophecy was not created in isolation, but rather in conversation with the cultures around it. The Bible reflects the human experience, our fears, our hopes, and our need to make sense of the world. Conclusion. So, how much of mythology shaped biblical prophecies? A lot more than we might have thought. From Mesopotamian flood myths to Greek battles of good and evil, the Bible is not just a sacred text, but a tapestry woven from the myths and legends of ancient civilizations. This doesn't diminish its value, but rather shows how deeply connected human cultures have always been. It's through these stories, both mythological and biblical, that we've tried to understand our place in the universe. If you found this journey through mythology and the Bible interesting, make sure to check out our next video, in which we explore the influence of Greek philosophy on early Christian thought.